Earlier this month, I attended Southern Assault for my first time. For those who don't know, Southern Assault is an Alpha Strike tournament run by Fortress Miniatures and Games. I think it is the biggest event for Alpha Strike, and this year saw 120 players gather in Winston-Salem, North Carolina for 6 rounds spread across 2 days. This video is going to cover the list that I brought to play, and how my weekend at the tournament went. For list building this year, Southern Assault required 375-point forces that were chosen from a given faction and era. A list could have at most 16 units with unit type maximums of 12 mechs, 8 vehicles, 5 infantry units, and 5 proto-mechs. Experimental units weren't allowed, and the only non-canon units allowed were the Greyhound, Percival, and Gawain from the Mech Bay podcast and Fortress. Skills could be anywhere from 2 to 5 except for artillery that needed to be skill 4 or 5. Then a rule of 2 was in effect, so that you could take no more than 2 of a given model, and for mechs those 2 needed to be different variants. When I signed up for the tournament, I was hoping to be fielding some of my new miniatures from the Mercenaries Kickstarter. When it became clear that I wasn't on track to get my delivery on time, I decided to instead build off of the list that I had used for the 2 Alpha Strike battle reports I made. For those, I was playing with 250 points with a focus on mobile medium mechs. I had a Wraith TR5, a Hunchback C, an Ares ERS-2N, a Trebuchet TBT-9N, a Phoenix Hawk PXH-9, and an Ontos heavy tank backing them up. Based on how those games had gone, I wanted to use the extra PV budget that I had for Southern Assault to bring some more durable units. For that, I decided to go with an awesome AWS 10KM and an Orion C. Then with the remaining points, I also added a Speedy Locust LCT-5M2, and swapped from the chemical laser variant of the Ontos to the 3053 upgrade that just gave it 1 more damage at long range. That list gave me 2 highly durable mechs and 2 fast medium mechs that could all hit hard, 4 very fast mechs with +4 TMMs for objective grabbing, and a high firepower tank to back them up. With my list settled, let's get on to the event itself. On Friday, the venue opened up for socializing, open gaming, painting demonstrations, and the Crabback charity game. I got there around 5 p.m., quickly found some of the other players attending from my local group, and then just hung out and got to meet some more folks throughout the evening. I didn't get over to the painting demos, but I did peek in on the charity game a bit. It did not go well for the Crabs, but they ended up raising more than $5,000 for the Children's Miracle Network. If you want to watch the game, Carrie from the Unicorn Company podcast live-streamed it and has the video up on her channel. After the Hunchback secured victory, a huge bunch of us headed out to a late dinner at a nearby Italian place, and then to our hotels to get some rest before the battles began. Saturday's schedule was 4 games with a lunch break in the middle. The first game scenario was Fight, a straightforward battle where the main objective was just destroying your opponent's force. Scoring for rounds was based on the margin of victory, with a tie game giving each player 12 battle points, and then an entirely lopsided game giving the winner 25 and the loser 0. Then secondary objectives could award a few additional battle points. For example, in this scenario, one of those was that you'd get 2 extra battle points for performing a melee attack. For this game, I was paired with William. He was playing a Jade Falcon list with a mix of mechs, VTOLs, and battle armor. He had a Warhammer 2C11, a Jade Hawk JHK-04, a Timberwolf W, a Flamberge 3, a Hellbringer D, a hybrid Balak Strike VTOL, 2 units of Ironhold Assault battle armor, and 2 units of Jade Falcon Stormbird battle armor. Compared to William's list, I think I was at a disadvantage on both durability and firepower, while not really having that much of a mobility advantage. As we played, I maneuvered around his forces while trying to minimize my own losses, but things did not go well for me. Jumping reduced the effective firepower of my fast mediums, while my less evasive units quickly went down to combined fire. When time was called for the round, I had taken out 133 points of his units while he had eliminated 274 points of my forces, leaving me with only my Ares, Phoenix Hawk, and Locust still on the board. After we tallied points, that gave William 21 battle points for the round and I only earned 12. For Game 2, the scenario was, did I hear you say supplies? The board had 1 objective at the center and then 4 more in the centers of the table's 4 quadrants. Our table had a big building in the center, so that central objective was going to belong to jumping units, but the other 4 were all on the ground and in fairly open spaces. In order to score, we'd need to control these objectives by being within 2 inches of them without any enemy units in that area. I was up against Anthony for this game, and he brought a list with the maximum of 16 units. He had a Zeus X 6WD, an Orion 2M, a Grasshopper 8K, a Cicada 3MA, a Whitworth 2H, a Panther 12A, a Jenner 2C2, a Spider 7KR, an engineering vehicle, 2 hybrid Balak Strike VTOLs, 2 units of Marauder battle armor, 2 mechanized hover platoons with flamers, and a jump platoon with flamers. As I reviewed his list before the game, I figured the big potential problems for me to deal with would be his pair of VTOLs and the ability of a bunch of cheap units to inflict heat at short range. My plan for the game was to have my Awesome hold 1 objective on my side while my Ontos held the other. Then my 3 jumping units could go for the central objective and my remaining units could put pressure on the far objectives. This ended up working out for me. My Hunchback and Orion were able to do enough damage to push Anthony's units off of one of his objectives, while my Locust managed to survive and contest his other on a key turn. The fight over the central objective was brutal, with my Jumpers facing off against his Jenner, Spider, and Marauder battle armor units, but neither of us managed to claim it at all during the game. I think a key thing for the game was that I played more aggressive than Anthony and then managed to survive against his mass defenders to prevent him from claiming objectives. Being able to hold more objectives throughout our game gave me a victory with 15 battle points earned to Anthony's 10. After turning in our score sheets for Game 2, we had an hour break for lunch and picking an army to vote on for the Player's Choice Award. The tournament had an option to pay for catered lunch there, and I had gone with that to avoid needing to spend the time to get to a nearby restaurant. In the cafeteria, we all talked about how our first 2 games had gone while eating. I was pretty happy with my 1-1 record so far. There was also a store set up to buy both new products and previously owned stuff from Fortress, but I resisted the urge to pick up anything during lunch, and headed back to the main room to look at the armies on display. As you can see from the pictures I took, there were a lot of awesome paint jobs and great display boards. I ended up casting my vote for a Stone's Lament force, where the painter had done a fantastic job with the skeletal designs. After the lunch break ended, it was time for Game 3. The scenario for this one was Strategic Points. This time there were 3 objectives on the board along the center line between the 2 player edges. Just like with the previous game, objectives could be claimed by being within 2 inches without any enemies in that area. Unlike that game though, no points could be scored in the first turn. For this game, I was lucky and got paired with Ray, the BattleTech line developer. He had brought an Ilklaner Davian list anchored by an Ares Super Heavy in the Apollo configuration. In addition to that monster, he had a Marauder 11D, an Archer 4M2, a Naya's Thunderbolt, a Rifleman 8D, a Phoenix Hawk 3PL, a Demolisher Heavy Tank, a Patton Tank, a Pike Support Vehicle with Plasma Cannons, and a J. Edgar Light Hover Tank. During the game, we fought hard to keep each other from controlling the objectives. On one turn, I managed to destroy his Patton Tank to claim one of them. Then a couple of turns later, he cleared my units off of another to claim a point. That was it for scoring, though, as our armies ground each other down. We tied on the primary objective, but I got one more point on secondaries to claim 19 battle points while Ray earned 18. Saturday's last game was Gridiron Titans. We would all be playing football with our armies as they tried to score field goals and touchdowns while simultaneously playing defense. Each team would have a ball token and an end zone on the far side of the field. Mechs could carry the ball, pass it, or kick it. Units would also be taken off the board once they had taken structure damage and then would respawn after sitting out a full turn. Based on conversations with other players afterwards, this game was by far the most controversial scenario of the tournament. Some people loved the idea and others had a lot of things they didn't like about it. I'll say that it felt very different from a normal game, and I was not a fan of units being removed once they had taken structure damage, but I still had fun while playing. I was up against Richard for this game. He brought a list with a Nightstar 9J, a Marauder 7M, a Bushwhacker X2, a Wolfhound 4WA, a Jackalope BD, a Demolisher Heavy Tank, a Rommel Tank, 2 Bulldog Medium Tanks, 2 Balak Strike VTOLs, and a Nightshade ECM VTOL. I was growing tired of facing off against Balak VTOLs at this point, but otherwise my list had a lot more mobility than his, that I was hoping would give me an edge. For the game, we each gave our ball to a fast unit. I trusted my Wraith with it, while he gave his to his Jackalope. Then we each tried to use the buildings available to avoid being shot as we moved across the field. The rest of our armies, meanwhile, slugged it out. As his Jackalope approached my side, I got lucky with my Ontos and took it out. Then on the far side of the board, I faced a choice. I could either try to kick the ball in for a field goal, which needed a 6+ roll, or I could go for a touchdown as long as I could survive a turn of shooting from his Nightstar. It had 6 attacks and I'd be fine as long as I took 3 or less damage, but otherwise I wouldn't score at all. I decided the field goal sounded safer, went for it, and made the kick. That put the football score 3-0 in my favor, and the remaining time wasn't enough for either of us to make it across the field again. That win granted me another 21 battle points, while Richard claimed 12 for the game. With Saturday's games wrapped up, a small group of us headed to a brew pub downtown to have a quieter dinner. We talked a lot about how our Gridiron Titans games had gone, and what we liked or didn't like about the scenario. Then, exhausted from our long days of gaming, we all headed back to our hotel rooms to get some sleep. Sunday's schedule was a game, a break for lunch, the final game, and then the awards ceremony. The first game of the day was Extraction. For this scenario, there would be 2 downed helicopter tokens on the board. Each of them would then have 2 survivor tokens nearby. The survivor tokens could be picked up and carried off the board, while the helicopters could be controlled by being within 2 inches. Points would be awarded at the end of the game based on how many objectives each player controlled at that point. I was up against Bob for this game. He brought a Tamar pack list with an Onager, a Warhammer 2C11, 2 crossbows, 1 E configuration and 1 B, a Stalking Spider 2, an Aerie, 2 Vedette medium tanks, and 2 units of close combat Rottweiler battle armor. This was another list where I felt outgunned and saw a lot of durability on the other side while not feeling like I had that big of a mobility advantage overall. Bob recognized that it'd be a challenge to stop me from getting the survivors closer to my side off the board, so he decided to focus his entire army on the other downed helicopter. I used my Locust and Wraith to quickly pull 2 survivors off while my Awesome hunkered down to protect the downed helicopter. Then on the other side of the board I tried to put pressure on his forces with the rest of my units. His durability and firepower won out though, and my forces were slowly whittled down to nothing. Then his Onager and crossbow, along with a tank and a unit of battle armor, marched across the board to face down my Awesome. My Awesome did not survive, but it managed to stomp through the battle armor unit in order to deny Bob the objective 2. That narrow victory gave Bob 20 battle points while I earned 17. After Game 5 wrapped up, there was a break for lunch. There were leftovers from Saturday's catered lunch available, and the store was open again too. This time I did give in and buy a few things from Fortress. The last game of the tournament was Hold the Line. The main objective of this one was to have as many of your units on your opponent's side of the board at the end of the game. Then bonus points were available for getting every unit of yours across the center line whether or not they survived, keeping your opponent from getting at least half of their units across or getting rear shots. I was paired with Les for this game. He brought a Hell's Horses force with an Executioner H, a Warhammer 2C8, a Gargoyle G, a Summoner HH, an Ebon Jaguar H, a Stormcrow B, a Nova F, and 2 Epona Pursuit Tank Es. That's a bunch of big clan mechs with a lot of firepower and the ability to give my unit some heat every turn. Our board was a complication for this mission. We had a river right across the middle. That meant at least one of my units, my Onto's tank, would likely not be making it to the other side. There was a slight bend in the river against each board edge, so it was technically possible for me to get it across the center line there, but I was pretty sure it wouldn't happen. That became even less likely during deployment when Les massed his forces on that side. I started my units out so that I could have some of them contesting his crossing while leaving my faster units on the far side so that they could cross with minimal opposition. As we played, his massive forces moved forward along one edge while my heaviest units moved up the middle of the board. They exchanged fire as they moved. I got lucky with a shot and immobilized one of his opponents early on. He put plenty of heat on my Orion and Awesome though, crippling them before they made it across the middle. As our last turn approached, I had my 4 fast mechs and my Hunchback on the far side, while Les had plenty of heavy mechs left. We exchanged fire on that turn and I lost my Hunchback while he lost his Stormcrow. That left us both with 4 mechs still alive. Les had more PV though, but it was a small enough margin that we counted as tied for the primary objective. After bonus points, he got a total of 14 battle points while I got 12. With that game over, we were done. I had earned 96 battle points across my 6 games, and on the primary objectives I had 2 wins, 2 ties, and 2 losses. Overall, I was pretty happy with that for my first time at the tournament, especially since I'm mostly a BattleTech player rather than Alpha Strike. Looking back at how my games went, I think my list leaned harder into mobility than ideal for the scenarios. My fast units were definitely useful, but I think I'd have been just fine with 2 or 3 of them rather than the 4 that I had. The PV from those then could have gone into something with more durability or firepower. I also think I could have gone with faster choices than the Orion, Ontos, and Awesome. In scenarios like Strategic Points, Extraction, and Hold the Line, I felt held back by how slowly those 3 were able to move. 1 or 2 slow units would probably be fine, but replacing at least one of them with a 10-inch mover probably would have felt a lot better in the games. Okay, now on to the award ceremony. After all of the points were tallied and the tables broken down, we all gathered in front of the stage to hear the results. There were a ton of prizes up on the stage thanks to prize support from Fortress, Catalyst, Ironwind Metals, Thunderhead Studios, Death Ray Designs, Eldon Cowger, Anthony Scroggins, and more. The winners would get trophies and first picks, then everyone else would get to go through the line and pick prizes in order of how they finished. The best overall winner was William Kim. Best General was won by Jacob Brooks. Best Sportsman was won by Donovan Marsh. Best Painted by Justin Hall. Best Hobbyist went to Josh Varga. And then Player's Choice was won by Michael Govorek. I ended up finishing tied for overall place 71 or 72 out of the 120 players. When I went through the prize line, I got some miniatures from Steel Rift, Lazy Forger, and Sage Print Labs, a brush case from Monument Hobbies, a set of Metalcore collectibles dice, and an art print from Eldon Cowger. Between those prizes, the initial swag bag, gifts from other attendees like the 40th anniversary patch and a jar of chocolate hazelnut spread, and game items that were given after finishing scenarios, I brought home a lot of new stuff, plus the things I bought on Sunday. To wrap things up, I had a great time at Southern Assault 4. It was a fun event and it was great to get to meet and hang out with a bunch of other players. I hope I'm able to attend it again in the future. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more from me, you can subscribe here on YouTube, at scottsgameroom.com, or on Patreon. I'd especially like to thank my patrons at the supporter tier for helping to make these videos possible.